Jake had known something was wrong for weeks, maybe even months, but he'd been too afraid to admit it to himself. The signs were there, subtle at first, but impossible to ignore once you started noticing. Sarah's phone was never out in the open anymore. It was always face down, locked, or tucked away somewhere out of sight. When Jake asked simple questions like, "Who was texting you that late last night?" she'd brush it off with a quick, "Just some work stuff," or a vague, "It's nothing, don't worry about it." But Jake's gut twisted tighter every time she avoided eye contact or changed the subject. They had been together almost 3 years, sharing everything, or so he thought. They talked about moving in together, maybe even getting married one day. Jake had pictures of them laughing, traveling, and dreaming of a future. But now, those memories felt like a fragile glass vase, ready to shatter at any moment. The final blow came out of nowhere. Mark, a mutual friend from college, sent Jake a text one evening. "Hey man, saw Sarah downtown at that new bar last night. She wasn't alone. Guy with her wasn't someone I recognized. Thought you should know." Jake stared at the message in disbelief. His hands shook slightly as he reread the words. He felt like the floor was slipping from beneath him. For a moment, he wanted to deny it, to believe that Mark was mistaken, that Sarah was just hanging out with a friend. But deep down, he already knew the truth. The next few days turned into a quiet, painful investigation. Jake became a ghost in their own relationship, watching from the sidelines as the woman he loved slowly slipped away. He scrolled through Sarah's social media profiles, noticed subtle hints, photos where Sarah had tagged Tom, a name Jake barely knew, cryptic comments under her posts, pictures that disappeared too quickly to save. One afternoon, Sarah left her phone unlocked on the kitchen counter. Jake couldn't resist the temptation. With trembling fingers, he opened her messages. There they were, flirty texts, plans to meet, and inside jokes with a man named Tom. The words stabbed at Jake's heart, each sentence confirming his worst fears. The hardest part wasn't just the betrayal, it was that Sarah never even tried to hide it well. But Jake didn't want to explode. He wanted control. He wanted her to feel the weight of her actions in a way that couldn't be brushed off or forgotten. Sarah's birthday was coming up in a week. They had planned a small party at their apartment, inviting close friends and family. Normally, Jake would have been excited, buying gifts, decorating the place. But now, all he could think about was how to make this night unforgettable, for all the wrong reasons. The day arrived. Jake woke up early, nerves coiling in his stomach like a live wire. He cleaned the apartment meticulously, arranged the decorations just so, and picked up Sarah's favorite chocolate cake. The living room was filled with the soft glow of fairy lights and the faint hum of background music. The air smelled faintly of vanilla and fresh flowers. Guests began to arrive, old friends, co-workers, Sarah's sister. Laughter and chatter filled the rooms as people mingled, catching up on life. Sarah entered the apartment looking radiant in a simple blue dress, her smile bright and carefree. She moved through the crowd, hugging friends and sharing jokes, completely unaware of the storm gathering just beneath the surface. Jake stood near the kitchen doorway, phone tucked safely in his pocket, heart pounding in his chest. Every time Sarah laughed, it felt like a punch to his gut. But he kept telling himself, patience. Timing was everything. The party rolled on. Music played, drinks were poured, and stories were shared. Sarah was the center of attention, her energy infectious. Jake watched her from afar, rehearsing the words he was about to say, the moment he'd been building toward. Finally, the moment came. The lights dimmed as the cake was brought out, candles flickering softly. Sarah closed her eyes to make a wish. The room hushed in anticipation. Suddenly, Jake stood up. His voice was calm but carried enough strength to cut through the murmur of conversations. "Hey, everyone," he began, drawing all eyes to him. "I want to say something. Something important." The room fell silent. Sarah's smile faltered, confusion spreading across her face. Jake took a deep breath and pulled out his phone, unlocking it with steady fingers. "For weeks, I've been trying to ignore what I knew deep down. But the truth can't stay hidden forever." He tapped the screen, swiping through a series of messages, texts between Sarah and a guy named Tom. Affectionate words, plans to meet, secret jokes. Then came photos from Mark's phone. Sarah and this man at a bar, laughing too closely, sitting side by side with an intimacy that was undeniable. The gasps around the room were audible. Sarah's face drained of color. "Jake, what are you doing?" she whispered, voice trembling. Jake met her eyes, pain and resolve burning in his own. "I thought you all deserved to know." Whispers erupted. Friends exchanged stunned looks. Some stared at Sarah with disbelief, others glanced at Jake with sympathy. Sarah tried to speak, but her words faltered, the weight of the moment crushing her. Jake sat back down, the tension in his body finally beginning to release. The party had transformed, from a celebration of Sarah's life to an unveiling of betrayal. As the night wore on, guests began to leave quietly, offering Jake quiet words of support. Others avoided eye contact with Sarah altogether. Stepping outside into the cool night air, Jake let out a long breath. The city lights blurred through his tears, but his mind was clearer than ever. Sometimes, he realized, silence isn't just golden, it's a weapon. And tonight would be a night nobody forgot. The aftermath of the party was unlike anything Jake had imagined. He had expected chaos, tears, angry confrontations, but what actually happened was a strange, suffocating silence. The kind that fills the space between people when everything important has been said, and nothing left to say remains. Sarah disappeared almost immediately after the revelation. She left the apartment early the next morning, taking only a small bag with her. Jake found her bed untouched, her clothes gone from the closet, and a note slipped under the door, "I'm sorry." No explanation, no apology, just 3 words heavy enough to crush. For Jake, that note was both a relief and a reminder. Relief that he wouldn't have to face her every day. Reminder that the woman he thought he knew was gone. But even after she left, her presence lingered in every corner of the apartment. The faint scent of her perfume on the curtains, the coffee mugs they'd shared on quiet Sunday mornings, the picture frames holding smiles now frozen in time. Jake spent days in a fog, going through the motions of work and daily life, but inside, he felt like he was unraveling. The betrayal had cut deep, and though he had exposed it in front of everyone, the wound still ached. Yet, amidst the pain, a flicker of determination grew. He realized that revenge, for him, wasn't about public humiliation anymore. That had been done. It wasn't about angry texts or yelling matches, either. It was about reclaiming his life, on his terms, at his pace. Jake started small. He contacted Sarah's boss subtly, dropping hints about her distracted behavior without sounding vindictive. His goal wasn't to get her fired, but to make sure she faced consequences for neglecting responsibilities during their final weeks together. At the same time, he reconnected with his own friends, who had noticed his withdrawal but hadn't known the full story. They rallied around him, offering late-night talks and the kind of support that doesn't ask for explanations. Social media was next. Together, Sarah had curated their online presence. Photos of trips, candid moments, anniversaries celebrated. Jake methodically went through every account, removing tags, deleting pictures, and erasing the digital footprints of a relationship that was no longer his. It wasn't easy. Each photo taken down felt like ripping off a bandage that hadn't quite healed. One afternoon, Jake found himself driving past the bar where Sarah had been seen with Tom. He sat in his car for a long time, watching from a distance. Inside, Sarah and Tom laughed, their faces illuminated by the dim glow of neon lights. Jake's chest tightened, but this time it wasn't with longing. It was with the sharp realization of how much control he'd given her over his happiness. That night, alone in his apartment, Jake opened his laptop. Instead of drafting angry messages or posts, he started writing a letter, not for Sarah, but for himself. "Dear Jake," it began. "This is the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. You are stronger than you know. You will heal. You will move on." He saved the letter, feeling lighter than he had in months. The days that followed brought a slow but steady healing. Jake threw himself into his passions again, jogging in the early morning, playing guitar, revisiting old hobbies he'd shelved during the relationship. He planned trips, sending emails to book a solo road trip across the country, a long drive with nothing but the open road and his thoughts. But as Jake rebuilt himself, Sarah wasn't done. One cold evening, as Jake was locking his door after a late run, the doorbell rang. He opened it to find Sarah standing on the porch, her eyes red and swollen, a mix of desperation and regret etched across her face. "Jake," she whispered. "Please, can we talk? I need to explain. I made a terrible mistake." Jake's heart clenched, but years of hurt and healing made him stronger now. He looked past her, swallowing the rush of old emotions. "Not now, Sarah," he said quietly but firmly. "Maybe someday. But not now." He closed the door gently but decisively. Leaning against the door, Jake let out a long breath. This time, there was no anger, no sadness, only peace. Revenge, he realized, wasn't about tearing someone down. Sometimes it was about rising up. Stronger, wiser, free. And that was the real victory. The days after Sarah's unexpected visit were some of the hardest Jake had ever faced, but they also marked the beginning of something new. Something he hadn't realized he needed until it was staring him in the face. His apartment, once a sanctuary filled with laughter and shared dreams, now felt like an empty shell. The walls echoed with memories that refused to fade. The scent of her favorite vanilla candle lingered in the air, a cruel reminder of what had been. Jake found himself wandering from room to room, touching things she had left behind, a scarf on a chair, a half-used bottle of lotion in the bathroom, each item a ghost of their past. For days, he avoided confronting the space fully, afraid that once he did, he'd finally have to accept that it was truly over. But avoidance was a thin bandage on a wound that needed proper healing. One afternoon, gathering courage, Jake decided to face the reality head-on. He began by packing away their shared belongings. He moved the photo frames off the shelves, pictures of them smiling on beach vacations, snapshots of quiet mornings in bed, and silly selfies from nights out with friends. Each image tugged painfully at his heart, but he reminded himself that memories weren't the same as his future. The souvenirs from trips, the little trinkets, ticket stubs, and keepsakes, were carefully boxed and placed in the back of a closet. He wasn't ready to throw them away yet, but he needed distance. That night, Jake sat alone on his couch, staring at the photo album they had made early in their relationship. The worn leather cover felt warm beneath his fingertips, a testament to years filled with hopes and plans. Flipping through the pages, he saw a younger version of himself, naive, hopeful, and in love. A tear slipped down his cheek, but this time, it was not just sorrow. It was also acceptance. Jake realized that those moments were part of his story, but they no longer defined who he was or who he would become. With a shaky hand, he pulled out his phone and deleted Sarah's number. The screen blinked briefly before the contact vanished forever. It was a small gesture, but it signified something profound, a declaration that he was ready to close that chapter and begin a new one. The following weeks were a whirlwind of emotions and self-discovery. Jake reconnected with old friends, some of whom had drifted away during his relationship. He accepted invitations to dinners, game nights, and weekend hikes. Slowly but surely, he was reminded of the man he used to be, someone independent, curious, and full of life. He also decided to take up painting, a hobby he had abandoned long ago. On the first day of class, he felt awkward and rusty, but as he mixed colors on the palette and brushed paint onto the canvas, he discovered a new way to express the chaos inside him. Some days were frustrating. The images in his mind refused to take shape on the canvas. Other days, he felt a thrilling surge of creativity that made his heart race. Painting became his therapy, a silent language where grief, anger, and hope could coexist. In the quiet solitude of the nights, Jake started journaling. He scribbled down his thoughts, fears, and dreams, pouring out the tangled emotions that cluttered his mind. The pages became a mirror, reflecting his journey from heartbreak to healing. One crisp autumn afternoon, while walking through a bustling park, Jake's attention was captured by the soulful notes of a guitar. He followed the melody to find a street musician pouring raw emotion into every chord. The music resonated deeply with Jake, awakening a part of him he thought had been lost. That evening, inspired, he pulled out his own guitar from the back of the closet. His fingers stumbled at first, rusty and uncoordinated, but soon he found the familiar rhythm. Music became another refuge, a way to transform pain into beauty. Meanwhile, Sarah's attempts to reach out grew less frequent. Her texts shifted from desperate pleas to quiet apologies, but Jake found himself unmoved. He understood now that forgiveness was not about excusing what happened, but about releasing the hold the past had on him. Months later, Jake stood at the airport, ready to embark on the solo road trip he had dreamed about for years but never dared to take. The open road symbolized freedom. Freedom from betrayal, from pain, and from the chains of his former life. As the plane soared above the clouds, Jake gazed out the window, watching the sprawling city shrink beneath him. A calm washed over him, one he hadn't felt in a long time. He was no longer a victim of heartbreak. He was a survivor, stronger and wiser. The road ahead was uncertain, but Jake was ready to face it with open arms. For the first time in what felt like forever, he was truly free. The road stretched out endlessly before Jake, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through endless fields and forests bathed in the golden hues of late summer. Each mile carried him further from the city, from the memories that had haunted him, and closer to a version of himself he hadn't met in years. His old life, the one shadowed by betrayal, heartbreak, and silence, was shrinking behind him, replaced by new landscapes, new faces, new possibilities. Jake found himself in small towns that felt like stepping back in time. Places where everyone knew everyone, and the pace of life slowed to a comforting rhythm. In one such town, he met Lily, a vibrant artist who transformed blank walls into colorful stories. She had a laugh that filled the air and a fire in her eyes that reminded Jake of the passion he'd lost. They talked for hours one afternoon beneath a mural she was painting, a swirl of blues and reds, a phoenix rising from ashes. Lily's story was one of reinvention, of shedding pain and embracing the unknown. Her courage sparked something inside Jake, a flicker of hope he hadn't felt in months. Further down the road, Jake crossed paths with Marcus, an old truck driver with a grizzled beard and a heart full of stories. Marcus shared tales of love and loss, of mistakes made and lessons learned on endless highways. His wisdom was simple but profound: you don't get to choose what happens to you, but you do get to choose how you move forward. Each night, Jake wrote in his journal, words flowing like the miles beneath his tires. He poured out his fears, his regrets, and his growing strength. The road was no longer just a physical escape, it was a path toward healing. Yet, no matter how far he traveled, echoes of the past crept into quiet moments, a song on the radio, a scent on the breeze, a phrase that Sarah once said. The ghosts lingered, reminders that healing wasn't linear. One evening, after a long day of driving through rolling hills and quaint villages, Jake checked into a modest motel. The worn carpet and flickering fluorescent lights were a far cry from the comfort of home, but tonight, the anonymity was a balm. His phone buzzed on the bedside table, startling him. A message. From Sarah. Jake, I'm sorry. I've changed. Can we talk? His heart hammered, a jumble of emotions crashing through him. Anger, confusion, old pain, and something he hadn't expected, calm. He stared at the screen, fingers hovering over the keyboard. For a long moment, he didn't respond. Then, with a steady breath, he typed, I hope you found the peace you were looking for. I have too. Jake hit send and placed the phone face down. Looking out the window, the night sky stretched vast and unending. The stars blinked quietly, indifferent to human dramas and heartbreaks. Jake smiled, a small, genuine curve of his lips. He was done looking back. Done letting the past define him. The open road was ahead, full of unknowns and promise. And this time, Jake was ready. The days after Sarah's message were unlike anything Jake had experienced before. For the first time in months, he wasn't running from his feelings or drowning them in distractions. Instead, he sat with them, allowing himself the rare luxury of reflection without judgment. The open road had brought him more than just physical distance from heartbreak. It had gifted him a new perspective on life, love, and himself. Traveling through endless fields and winding mountain roads, Jake found the world filled with small moments of unexpected grace, a child's laughter echoing across a playground, the comforting aroma of fresh coffee in a roadside cafe, a stranger's kind smile at a gas station. These moments reminded him that despite pain, the world was still full of beauty waiting to be discovered. Back in his motel room that evening, he pulled out his journal, a leather-bound companion that had traveled every mile with him. The pages were filled with raw, unfiltered thoughts. Anger, sorrow, hope, fear, and above all, the slow but steady growth of acceptance. He wrote about forgiveness, not the hollow kind that ignores betrayal, but a deep, liberating forgiveness that frees the soul. Forgiveness wasn't about Sarah anymore. It was about Jake reclaiming his life, untethered from the shadows of the past. One night, as the rain pattered gently against the windowpane, Jake wandered into a quiet cafe nestled in a sleepy town. The warm glow of Edison bulbs and the faint scent of cinnamon welcomed him inside. There he met Emma, a writer with eyes full of stories and a smile that felt like an invitation to hope. They struck up a conversation about books, dreams, and the messy beauty of life. Emma's laughter was a balm, a reminder that connection could exist without fear or pretense. Over the next few days, Jake and Emma met repeatedly, their conversations weaving a tapestry of trust and curiosity. They shared late-night talks about heartbreak and healing, the kind of vulnerable exchanges Jake hadn't known he craved. Slowly, the heavy weight of loneliness began to lift, replaced by the gentle promise of companionship. Yet, healing was never a straight path. There were days when the past surged forward like a tidal wave, dragging Jake back into the depths of pain. On those days, memories of Sarah's betrayal haunted him, the whispered lies, the stolen moments, the suffocating silence that followed. The nights when the apartment felt colder, the mornings when getting out of bed seemed impossible. But Jake learned to sit with those feelings without letting them consume him. He accepted the pain as part of his journey, riding the waves instead of fighting them. Meditation, long walks along deserted beaches, and journaling became his anchors. One afternoon, while exploring a coastal town with jagged cliffs and roaring waves, Jake stood at the edge, the wind whipping through his hair and the salty spray kissing his skin. The vast ocean stretched infinitely before him, a mirror to the endless possibilities ahead. In that moment, he felt both small and infinitely powerful, connected to something larger than his pain. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange, pink, and violet. Jake breathed deeply, savoring the stillness. He realized that life wasn't about avoiding pain or chasing perfection. It was about embracing the full spectrum of experience, the heartbreak and the joy, the endings and the beginnings. In the weeks that followed, Jake continued his journey, not just across miles, but within himself. He tried new things, painting classes that challenged his creativity, cooking lessons that made him laugh at his own mistakes, late-night poetry readings where strangers bared their souls. Each experience was a thread in the tapestry of his healing. Back home, his phone remained silent from Sarah. No further messages, no pleas for forgiveness or explanations. And that silence, once unbearable, now felt like closure. Jake felt ready. Ready to face whatever came next with open eyes and an open heart. One crisp morning, he stood in front of a mirror, studying the man looking back. Someone changed, scarred but stronger, wiser but still hopeful. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was his. And for the first time in a long time, Jake smiled genuinely. He was no longer defined by betrayal or heartbreak. He was a survivor, a man ready to write his own story. The city lights flickered through the curtains as Jake lay awake, the familiar hum of urban life seeping through the walls of his apartment. It was a sound he once found suffocating, but now it felt like a heartbeat, steady, reassuring, alive. He stared at the ceiling, letting his thoughts drift like clouds in a restless sky. The months since Sarah's departure had been a strange mixture of silence and noise. Silence, because her absence echoed in every corner. Noise, because inside him, a storm of emotions raged and settled over and over again. Jake's journey had taken him far beyond the physical miles traveled. It had been an odyssey of the soul, traversing the peaks of hope and the valleys of despair. He had confronted the raw edges of betrayal, faced the ache of loneliness, and slowly stitched the tattered pieces of his heart back together. Yet, healing was not linear, and the past still whispered on quiet nights. Memories crept in uninvited. The way Sarah's laugh once lit up a room, the subtle touch of her hand, the plans they had sketched on lazy Sundays. Those ghosts weren't enemies. They were reminders of what had been, and what had taught him. Jake swung his legs over the side of the bed, feet touching the cool hardwood floor. He reached for his journal, thick with pages now dense with reflections and revelations. His fingers brushed over the inked words, tracing the evolution of a man learning to love himself again. Tonight, the words came easier. I am not my pain. I am not my past. I am becoming. He closed the journal gently and stood, moving toward the window. The city sprawled beneath him, a tapestry of light and shadow, chaos and calm. He inhaled deeply, feeling the cool air fill his lungs, steadying the flutter in his chest. His phone lay on the table, screen dark and silent. No new messages from Sarah. The silence was no longer a wound but a quiet shield. Jake thought back to the moment he had confronted Sarah in front of their friends, exposing the truth that shattered their world. The pain was still sharp, but so was the clarity it had brought. Truth was a fierce weapon, not for destruction, but for liberation. He recalled the road trip that followed, endless highways, sunsets burning like promises, strangers whose kindness rekindled his faith in people. There was Lily, whose art told stories of rebirth. Marcus, the truck driver who taught him the power of choice. Emma, whose laughter healed cracks in his heart. Each encounter was a thread weaving strength into his being. The room was quiet, save for the soft strains of music drifting from his old record player. A song he had discovered on the road, its melancholy melody now a comforting companion. Jake's thoughts shifted to the future. The open road had taught him that endings were beginnings in disguise. He wasn't bound by the mistakes or betrayals of the past. He was free to write his own story, one filled with hope, courage, and love, both for others and himself. He poured himself a glass of water and sat down, letting the weight of the night settle. The city's pulse outside mirrored his own, a rhythm of persistence and possibility. In that stillness, Jake made a silent vow, to live fully, to embrace vulnerability, and to never let fear dictate his path again. As dawn crept closer, painting the sky in soft shades of lavender and gold, Jake closed his eyes with a peaceful smile. Tomorrow was unwritten, and he was ready. The morning sun filtered gently through the blinds of Jake's apartment, casting soft golden rays across the room. The light spilled in like a quiet promise, painting everything it touched with a warm glow that made the mundane feel sacred. The faint dust particles danced lazily in the beams, as if the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for the day to fully awaken. Outside, the city was coming to life in its usual symphony of sounds, the distant rumble of engines on busy streets, the rhythmic footsteps of pedestrians weaving between crosswalks, the sharp laughter of children chasing one another through nearby parks. The faint clinking of coffee cups and the hum of conversations spilled out from cafes scattered down the block. It was an orchestra of everyday moments, ordinary and extraordinary all at once, reminding Jake that life was unstoppable, moving forward regardless of the pain or loss it carried beneath the surface. Jake sat at his kitchen table, a sturdy piece of worn wood that had seen better days but now felt like an anchor. He cradled a warm mug of coffee between his hands, the rich aroma curling up and filling the room with its comforting scent. The bitterness mixed with subtle hints of chocolate and caramel, grounding him in the present. For the first time in what felt like months, a quiet peace settled deep within him, a peace not born from forgetting or denying the past, but from truly confronting it and choosing to rise beyond it. His eyes traced the familiar cracks and scratches in the tabletop, memories of mornings spent here with Sarah flooding back. He remembered the careless laughter, the hurried breakfasts, the intimate conversations that had once filled this very room. The past wasn't gone, it was a living, breathing presence, neither friend nor enemy, but a part of him he could no longer avoid. Jake's mind wandered back to the night that changed everything, the party where secrets spilled like shattered glass, slicing through the carefully constructed illusion of their life together. He could still see the look on Sarah's face. The shock, the panic, the moment when the truth escaped her lips, irrevocable and raw. The gasps of their friends echoed in his memory, a chorus of disbelief and betrayal. And then, the heavy silence that followed, thick and suffocating, as if the world itself was holding its breath. That night had felt like an ending, a closing of a painful chapter he never wanted to read. But now, sitting here bathed in morning light, Jake understood that it had also been a beginning, an opening door to something he had never dared to imagine before. The days and weeks that followed had been a tumultuous journey through grief and anger, confusion and eventual self-discovery. The lonely nights when memories threatened to drown him, the open roads that offered solace and new perspectives, the small connections with strangers who unknowingly helped him heal, all of it had led him to this very moment. On the table lay his journal, its pages thick with the raw, unfiltered thoughts of a man learning to love himself again. The faded leather cover was soft from years of use, a silent witness to his transformation. He picked it up gently and flipped through the pages slowly, tracing the evolution of his heart and mind, from the shattered pieces of betrayal to the tentative stitches of hope and courage. Each entry was a marker on the map of his healing, a testament to resilience and renewal. A gentle buzz interrupted his reverie. Jake reached for his phone, the screen lighting up with a message from Emma, the writer he had met during his travels, whose kindness had been a balm for his battered spirit. "Thinking of you today. Hope you find moments of joy." Jake's lips curled into a soft smile. Fingers hovering over the screen, he paused, feeling the warmth of genuine connection despite the distance. Then, slowly, he typed back. "Thank you, Emma. I already have. More than I thought possible." He set the phone down and looked around his apartment. It was no longer just a place filled with reminders of loss and loneliness. The fresh coat of paint on the walls breathed new life into the space, reflecting the soft morning hues outside. Thriving green plants sat by the windowsill, their leaves stretching toward the light, adding vibrancy and hope. Books and souvenirs from his travels, tokens of distant places and new experiences, were carefully arranged on shelves like trophies of survival and growth. For a long moment, the past tried to whisper its doubts and fears in the quiet corners of the room. But Jake had learned to listen without being chained. Those memories were no longer prisons. They were teachers, harsh but honest, necessary and true. He rose from his chair and walked to the window, the hardwood floor cool beneath his feet. Pulling aside the curtain, he gazed out over the city skyline, a vast mosaic of glass and steel, light and shadow. The horizon stretched wide and inviting, a canvas of endless possibilities. Jake thought deeply about what it truly meant to move on. It wasn't about forgetting or suppressing the past. It was about embracing every part of the journey, the pain and